June 3, 1969. Cummins Prison Farm, Arkansas. Johnny Cash did something no performer had ever attempted. He let the inmates take the stage. It started with a dare from a lifer named Marcus Stone. Write in the comments, where are you listening to this story from? And what time is it right now? You sing about walking the line, Cash, but you've never crossed it. The warden immediately stood up. The guards moved in, but Cash, sweat dripping down his face in the 100-degree heat, handed his guitar to the convicted murderer. What happened in the next 7 minutes would become prison legend. The temperature that day hit 104 degrees. The Arkansas humidity made it feel like breathing through wet cotton. Cummins Prison Farm wasn't like Folsom or San Quentin. No walls, no cells, just 16,000 acres of cotton fields and men in white uniforms working under armed guards on horseback. This was the Deep South's version of hell, where men picked cotton like their ancestors had, only now with sentences instead of chains. Cash had insisted on this show. His manager Saul Hulliffe fought him. Columbia Records threatened to pull promotional support. Even June was against it. Cummins had a reputation. 3 inmates killed by guards in the past year, though officially they all tried to escape. The Arkansas prison system was under federal investigation for human rights violations. This wasn't a place for entertainment. It was a place where men disappeared. But Cash had received a letter that changed his mind. It came from inmate James Mississippi Wilson, smuggled out through a minister. Wilson wrote, "Mr. Cash, we ain't asking you to save us. We're asking you to see us. Nobody sees us down here. We pick cotton dawn to dusk. We die in these fields, and the world don't know we exist. You sang you've been everywhere, man, but you ain't been here. And here is where music goes to die." Cash arrived at 2 p.m. with June, Carl Perkins, and the Statler brothers. The first thing that hit them was the smell: sweat, cotton dust, and something else. Desperation, the kind that seeps into the soil after decades of suffering. Warden Charles Whitman met them at the main building, a plantation house that looked like it hadn't changed since 1860. Whitman was 6'5", former college football player, with hands like ham hocks and a smile that never reached his eyes. "Mr. Cash," Whitman said, his Arkansas drawl thick as molasses, "I want to be clear about our rules. These men are animals. You don't talk to them beyond your performance. You don't take requests. You don't engage. They work the fields all day. And this concert is a privilege they probably don't deserve. Any sign of trouble, we shut it down." June gripped Cash's arm. She could feel the tension in his muscles, the way he got before a fight, but he just nodded. The concert was set for the prison yard, really just a dirt field between the barracks and the cotton fields. They'd built a small wooden platform, maybe 3 feet high. No roof, no shade. The sun beat down mercilessly. By 4 p.m., when the inmates marched in from the fields, the temperature on that wooden stage was approaching 115 degrees. 700 men filed in, their white uniforms stained with sweat and dirt. They sat on the ground, in perfect rows, guards with shotguns, positioned every 20 feet. The men moved in absolute silence. At Cummins, talking without permission got you 3 days in the hole, a metal box in the ground, where temperatures could reach 120 degrees. But here's what the official records won't tell you. There was already a plan in motion. Marcus Stone had been at Cummins for 15 years, life sentence for killing a sheriff's deputy in 1954, though Stone maintained the deputy had murdered his brother first and made it look like a hunting accident. Stone was 41 years old, built like a linebacker, with scars across his back from 5 escape attempts. He was also the unofficial leader of the black inmates, who made up 70% of Cummins's population. Stone had been planning this moment for months, ever since they heard Cash was coming. Not a riot, not violence, something else, a test, a challenge, a moment of truth. Cash opened with fulsome prison blues, his black shirt already soaked through with sweat. The inmates watched in silence. No clapping allowed, no cheering, just 700 men staring while armed guards watched for any sign of trouble. Second song, I Walk the Line. That's when Marcus Stone stood up. Stop. Listen carefully, because this moment changed everything. Standing up without permission at Cummins was punishable by a week in the hole, but Stone stood anyway, slowly, hands visible, making it clear he wasn't threatening anyone. The guards immediately moved toward him, but Stone spoke first, his voice carrying across the yard. Mr. Cash, may I say something? Warden Whitman was on his feet, face red with rage. Guards were chambering rounds. The other inmates held their breath. This could go very bad, very fast. Cash stopped playing. He looked at Stone, then at the warden, then back at Stone. Let him speak, Cash said into the microphone. Whitman started to object, but Cash repeated, louder, let the man speak. The yard was silent, except for the distant buzz of cicadas. Stone had everyone's attention. Mr. Cash, Stone said, his voice steady despite the guns pointed at him. You sing about walking the line. You sing about being in prison. You sing about shooting men and hard times. But with all respect, sir, you don't know nothing about it. The tension ratcheted up another notch. June looked terrified. Carl Perkins had his hand on Cash's shoulder, trying to pull him back. But Stone wasn't done. You go home tonight to your big house. We go back to the fields. You sing about prison, but you ain't never picked cotton. 16 hours in 100-degree heat. You ain't never been whipped for looking a guard in the eye. You ain't never watched a man die of heat stroke and had to keep working while his body lay there. Some of the white guards were moving closer. Batons out. This was heading toward violence. So I got a challenge for you, Mr. Cash, Stone continued. You want to sing about walking the line? Cross it. Right now. Give me that guitar, and let me show you what prison blues really sounds like. Let a real convict sing the truth. The warden was apoplectic. Stone, you just earned yourself a month in the hole. Sit down now or I'll take his challenge. Everyone turned. Cash had spoken. He was walking toward the edge of the stage, guitar in hand. Johnny, no, June whispered urgently. But Cash was already climbing down from the platform. The guards didn't know what to do. Do they stop him? Protect him? Shoot Stone? The warden was shouting orders, but nobody was listening. All eyes were on Cash as he walked across the dirt toward Marcus Stone. When he reached Stone, Cash did something that would become legend in the Arkansas prison system. He held out his guitar, his black Gibson, the one he'd played at the White House, the one he'd used on every major recording. Show me, Cash said simply. What happened next is why this story was buried for 50 years. Stone took the guitar with hands that trembled slightly. Not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. 700 inmates watched in absolute silence. This had never happened. A free man, a celebrity, trusting a convicted killer with something precious. Stone strapped on the guitar and spoke to the crowd. This is for every man who ever died in these fields. Every man who lost his soul, picking cotton for the state of Arkansas. This is our truth. Then Marcus Stone began to play. What came out wasn't pretty. It wasn't polished. Stone's fingers were call-used from years of field work, not suited for fine fretwork. But what he played was real. It was a work song, the kind sung in the cotton fields when guards weren't listening. But he'd adapted it, turned it into something else. The lyrics he sang have been reconstructed from multiple testimonies. Warden calls me boy, though I'm a man full grown, working in his fields from sun to sun. My brother's in the ground, put there by the law. They said he ran, but dead men cannot run. Mr. Cash, you sing of chains, but yours are made of gold. Mine are made of cotton, blood, and time. You walk your line in freedom. I walk mine in hell. And when I die, they'll say I paid for crime. But the most shocking moment was still to come. As Stone sang, other inmates began to stand, one by one, defying every rule, risking severe punishment. First the men in Stone's work crew, then others. Within 30 seconds, all 700 men were on their feet. They didn't sing along, they didn't cheer. They just stood, silent, bearing witness. The guards were panicking. This looked like the beginning of a riot. Fingers on triggers, safeties off. Warden Whitman was screaming for everyone to sit down, but nobody was listening. Stone finished his song and handed the guitar back to Cash. But Cash didn't take it. "Keep playing," Cash said. "Johnny, we need to leave. Now," June called from the stage. But Cash turned to address the crowd. "Anyone else have a song? A real song. Not from radio or records. A song from here." This was insane. The warden was beside himself. Guards were calling for backup. This was about to explode into violence. An old man in the front, must have been 70, raised his hand. His name was Eugene Papa Caldwell, doing life for a murder he committed in 1928. "I got one, Mr. Cash. But I need someone to help me sing it." Cash walked over to Papa Caldwell. "I'll help you." For the next 5 minutes, Johnny Cash stood in the dirt of Cummins prison farm, under the brutal Arkansas sun, and sang a call and response work song with a 70-year-old convicted murderer. The song was about a woman named Sally, who waited 40 years for a man who would never come home. Cash didn't know the words, so he hummed along, creating harmonies on the spot. But here's the detail that changes everything you thought you knew about this day. While Cash and Caldwell were singing, Marcus Stone did something that could have gotten him killed. He walked over to Warden Whitman. The guards immediately pointed their weapons at Stone, but he kept walking, hands visible, moving slowly. "Warden," Stone said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "you got 2 choices. You can shut this down, and tomorrow you'll have a riot, real violence. Men who got nothing to lose because you took everything. Or you can let this happen. Let these men sing. Let them be human for 1 hour. And tomorrow we go back to the fields peaceful." Whitman's face was purple with rage. "You threatening me, boy?" "No, sir. I'm offering you a deal. Same kind of deal you make us every day. Comply or suffer. Only difference is, today we got leverage. 700 men who just remembered they're human. You want to try to put that back in the bottle?" The yard was silent, everyone waiting to see what would happen. Cash spoke up. "Warden, these men aren't rioting, they're singing. Since when is that a crime?" "You don't understand what you're doing," Whitman snarled. "These aren't folk singers. They're killers, rapists, thieves." "So was the thief on the cross next to Jesus," Cash replied. "And Christ promised him paradise." That reference to scripture hit different in the Deep South. Some of the guards, raised in church, shifted uncomfortably. Stone pressed his advantage. 1 hour, Warden. You give us 1 hour to sing our songs, tell our stories. After that we go back to being your property. But for 1 hour, we're men." Whitman looked around. He was outnumbered, outmaneuvered. If this turned violent, there would be an investigation. Federal investigators were already sniffing around Arkansas prisons. The last thing he needed was a riot with Johnny Cash in the middle of it. 1 hour, Whitman said finally. "But when it's over, Stone, you're going in the hole." "Worth it," Stone replied. What happened over the next hour has been pieced together from testimonies given years later, when many of these men were finally free. Cash climbed back on stage and made an announcement. "Anyone who wants to sing, come up, share your song. This stage belongs to you today. It was unprecedented. Inmates performing at their own prison concert. The insurance liability alone was staggering, but Cash didn't care about liability anymore. The first to come up was a young white kid, maybe 22, named Tommy Hendricks, doing 10 years for robbing a gas station. Tommy couldn't play guitar, but he could sing. He performed a song his grandmother taught him, an old Appalachian murder ballad about love and revenge. His voice was pure, untrained but honest. Next came 3 Mexican inmates who sang a corrido about crossing the border, getting arrested, and dying far from home. They sang in Spanish, but everyone understood the sadness in it. Then something extraordinary happened. A white inmate named Robert Bryant and a black inmate named Willie James, who worked the same crew but had never spoken beyond necessity, stood up together. "We want to sing something we made up in the fields," Bryant said. They performed a work song they'd created together, alternating verses, black and white voices, weaving together a story about 2 men who hated each other until they realized they were both slaves to the same system. Wait, here's where this story takes its darkest turn. While the inmates were performing, a guard named Lieutenant Roy Hutchins had heard enough. Hutchins was old school, been at Cummins since 1945. To him this was chaos, disorder, everything the prison system stood against. He decided to act. Hutchins walked to the edge of the yard and fired his shotgun into the air. The blast echoed across the fields. Everyone froze. Several inmates dropped to the ground, conditioned by years of violence. Others stood defiant. The guards all raised their weapons, ready for orders. "This ends now," Hutchins shouted. "Everyone back to barracks, or we start shooting." The yard teetered on the edge of explosion. 700 desperate men, armed guards, and Johnny Cash standing in the middle of it all. Cash did something then that nobody expected. He walked directly to Lieutenant Hutchins, not aggressive, but purposeful. When he reached him, Cash spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Lieutenant, I understand you're doing your job, but these men are doing something more important. They're remembering they're human. You can shoot them for that if you want, but you'll have to shoot me first." Cash positioned himself between Hutchins and the inmates. June Carter almost fainted. The Statler brothers were frozen in shock. Carl Perkins later said it was the bravest and stupidest thing he'd ever seen. Hutchins looked at Cash, then at the inmates, then at Warden Whitman, who was calculating the catastrophe of Johnny Cash being shot at a prison concert. "Stand down, Lieutenant," Whitman ordered. Hutchins lowered his weapon, but his eyes promised retribution later. The concert continued, but now with an edge of danger that made it electric. Every song felt like defiance. Every voice raised was a small revolution. Marcus Stone took the stage again, this time with Cash's permission, and even the warden's grudging acceptance. He performed one more song, this one about his brother who was killed by that sheriff's deputy. It was raw, angry, full of pain, but it was also about forgiveness, not for the deputy, but for himself, for surviving when his brother didn't. And as Stone sang, something unprecedented happened in the racial dynamics of Cummins. White inmates started humming along, providing a wordless backdrop to Stone's pain, not because they were forced to, but because they recognized the grief. Many of them had lost brothers too, to poverty, to violence, to the system that had trapped them all. Here's what the guards' reports didn't include. By the end of that hour, racial lines had blurred. White and black inmates were standing together, not integrated by force, but by choice. They were experiencing something together that transcended the divisions the prison system relied on to maintain control. The hour ended with Cash taking back the stage, but instead of performing one of his hits, he did something else. "I want to sing a new song," he said. "I haven't written it yet, but you all just taught it to me." Cash began to improvise, weaving together fragments of what he'd heard. Work songs, murder ballads, corridos, stories of loss and survival. It wasn't a complete song, more like a musical conversation with the men of Cummins. He would sing a line, and they would respond with hums or words, creating something that had never existed before and would never exist again. The song lasted 7 minutes. No recording exists. Warden Whitman had forbidden any recording equipment, but men who were there remembered fragments. In the Arkansas heat, where the cotton grows high, where men break their backs and forgotten men die, I met 700 souls that the world threw away, but they sang like angels on that burning June day. When it ended, the yard was silent. Then, slowly, Marcus Stone started clapping. Others joined. Soon, 700 men were applauding, not just for Cash, but for themselves, for what they'd created together. Warden Whitman stood up. "Show's over. Back to barracks." Now, the men began filing out, but differently than they'd filed in. There was something in their posture, their eyes. They walked like men, not prisoners. As Marcus Stone passed Cash, he stopped. "Thank you," Stone said simply. "Don't thank me," Cash replied. "You taught me something today. You all did." "What's that?" "That freedom isn't about being outside walls. It's about being able to sing your own song, even if just for an hour." Stone smiled, the first time he'd smiled in years, according to witnesses. "Mr. Cash, you crossed the line today. Welcome to the other side." Guards escorted Stone away. He would spend the next month in solitary confinement, in that metal box in the ground. But inmates who saw him go said he was still smiling. The aftermath of this concert was immediate and severe. Warden Whitman banned all future musical performances at Cummins. He increased work hours and decreased rations, punishment for the disorder. Lieutenant Hutchins led a campaign of harassment against any inmate who'd performed that day. But something had changed that couldn't be unchanged. The story spread through the Arkansas prison system like wildfire. Inmates at other facilities heard about the day Johnny Cash let convicts take his stage. It became legend, growing with each telling. More importantly, it sparked something in the men who were there. Papa Caldwell, the old man who sang with Cash, became a mentor to younger inmates. He started teaching them the old songs, the ones from before radio and records, the ones that carried history in their verses. When he died 3 years later, over 100 inmates risked punishment to sing at his burial in the prison cemetery. Tommy Hendrix, the young white kid who sang the murder ballad, started a secret music group in the barracks. They would practice at night, whispered songs and finger-snapped rhythms. Several members of that group went on to become musicians after their release. Robert Bryant and Willie James, the black and white inmates who sang together, became inseparable. They worked the same crew, ate together, protected each other. In the rigidly segregated world of Arkansas prisons, their friendship was revolutionary. Both men survived their sentences and were released in the mid-1970s. They stayed friends until Bryant's death in 1998. But the most important aftermath involves Marcus Stone. Stop. This is crucial to understanding the real impact of that day. Stone's month in solitary almost killed him. Temperatures in the box reached 120 degrees. He was given minimal water, no food for the first 3 days. When he emerged, he'd lost 30 pounds and could barely walk. But he was unbroken. Stone became a different kind of leader after that. He organized peaceful protests, work slowdowns, hunger strikes, letter-writing campaigns to outside organizations. He learned to read law books and helped other inmates with their appeals. He turned the memory of that concert into a tool for resistance. In 1974, Stone's case was reviewed by civil rights lawyers who'd heard about the concert and became interested in his story. They discovered prosecutorial misconduct in his original trial, witnesses who'd been threatened, evidence that had been suppressed. His conviction was overturned. After 20 years in Cummins, Marcus Stone walked free. He spent the rest of his life as a prison reform advocate, traveling the country, speaking at universities and churches. He always began his talks the same way. On June 3, 1969, Johnny Cash handed me his guitar in a prison yard. For 7 minutes, I wasn't a convict. I was a man with something to say. That's all any of us want, to be heard, to be seen as human. Stone died in 2003, the same year as Johnny Cash. At his funeral, they played a recording of Cash singing "I Walk the Line." His daughter spoke about how her father had kept a photo from that day, a contraband picture another inmate had secretly taken, showing Stone holding Cash's guitar while 700 men stood in silent salute. Cash himself rarely spoke publicly about the Cummins concert, but in his personal journals, donated to the Country Music Hall of Fame after his death, he wrote, June 3, 1969, Cummins Prison Farm. Today I learned what courage really looks like. It's not a man in black singing about rebellion. It's men in white uniforms, standing up when standing up could get them killed. Marcus Stone. And those men at Cummins taught me that the line I sing about walking isn't between right and wrong. It's between being human and letting the system make you something else. Today, 700 men walked that line together, and for 1 hour, they won. The official record of the concert lists it as a brief performance with minor disruptions, concluded without serious incident. Arkansas Department of Corrections refuses to comment on it to this day. But the truth lives on, in 1,000 small ways. In the songs that inmates passed down, modified and shared across decades. In the relationships that formed across racial lines that day. In the moment when Johnny Cash proved that sometimes the greatest act of rebellion is to treat oppressed people like human beings. Lieutenant Roy Hutchins, the guard who fired his weapon, retired 6 months later. His son would later reveal that Hutchins had nightmares about that day. Not about violence, but about the singing. He would wake up hearing 700 voices in harmony, and it terrified him more than any riot could. Because riots can be suppressed, but songs, once sung, live forever. In 1994, 25 years after the concert, a reunion was organized. 17 men who'd been at Cummins that day, now free, gathered in Little Rock. Marcus Stone was there. They sang the old songs, the work songs, the ones that had kept them human in an inhuman place. A reporter asked Stone if he ever regretted challenging Johnny Cash that day, considering the punishment he endured. Stone laughed. Regret it? Son, that was the day I remembered I was alive. I'd do a year in the hole for that feeling. The guitar Cash played that day, the black Gibson that Marcus Stone held for 7 minutes, now sits in the Country Music Hall of Fame. If you look closely, you can see fingerprints on the neck, not Cash's, but Stone's, preserved under a special coating. The museum placard reads simply, Johnny Cash's guitar, used at Folsom and San Quentin. No mention of Cummins, no mention of the day Cash handed it to a convicted killer and changed the definition of what a prison concert could be. But those fingerprints tell the real story. They're the prints of a man who picked cotton in 104-degree heat, who spent a month in a metal box for the crime of singing, who proved that dignity can't be imprisoned. This is the concert that almost started a riot, but instead started a revolution of human dignity. The day Johnny Cash crossed his own line and stood with the condemned. The day 700 forgotten men stood up and demanded to be seen. The day music didn't just entertain, it liberated, even if just for an hour. And now you know what really happened when Marcus Stone dared Johnny Cash to cross the line, and Cash walked straight across it into a truth that would haunt and inspire him for the rest of his life. The man in black met men in white that day, and in the 100-degree heat of an Arkansas prison farm, they created something that couldn't be killed, couldn't be buried, couldn't be forgotten. Proof that even in hell, human beings can sing.